All right, let's dive into the fascinating and pretty complex world of how a union actually gets voted in. It's a formal process, a journey with very specific rules, key players, and yeah, some pretty high stakes for everyone involved.
It really all boils down to one fundamental choice. Do you, as an employee, negotiate your own terms, one-on-one? Or do you join forces with your coworkers to speak with a single, much louder, collective voice?
So you've got these two very different approaches, right? On one side, individual bargaining. It's just you and the boss. On the other side, you've got collective bargaining, the whole idea of strength in numbers. And to make that happen, the law gives employees a formal path to get there. It's called a certification election.
Okay, to really get a grip on how this election works, you gotta know who's on the field. It's not just as simple as employees versus employer. It gets a lot more specific. First up, you have what's called the bargaining unit. The easiest way to think about this is as the official team of voters in this election. It's a group of employees who all share common ground, what the law calls a mutuality of interest. So this could be all the nurses in a hospital, or maybe all the employees at one specific warehouse. And playing for their vote is the bargaining agent. This is the actual labor union that wants to represent that entire bargaining unit. And this is a huge deal because if they win the election, they become the sole and exclusive voice for everyone in that unit when it comes to bargaining, even the people who didn't vote for them. So, how does this whole journey even get started? Well, it turns out there are two completely different paths you can take, and it all depends on one key thing. Is there already a union in the picture or not?
And this is the crucial difference. In an unorganized workplace, meaning no union, an election is pretty much automatic once a petition is filed. The law really favors giving workers a chance to organize. But if a workplace is already organized, with a union and a contract in place, the rules get way stricter. A new election is conditional. You need to show support from at least a quarter of the employees, and you can only file for it during a very specific time.
And that special window of time, it's actually got a name, the freedom period. It's this 60-day window at the very end of a union contract's 5-year term. This is basically the one designated shot for workers to challenge their current union or switch to a new one if they want to.
All right, let's get to the main event, the election itself. And this is not some kind of free-for-all, okay? It is governed by very specific rules that lay out exactly what the employer can do and what the workers need to do to win fairly.
Now, if there's one rule you remember for the employer, it's this one, the bystander rule. This is a huge concept. Legally, the employer is considered a stranger to this whole process. Why? To make sure that the decision to unionize, or not, stays exactly where it belongs, with the workers, free from any management pressure. And the employer's role is actually super simple to remember. Just think S&O. They have to submit the list of all eligible employees. They have the right to be notified that a petition has been filed. But, and this is the big one, opposition is strictly prohibited. They cannot interfere, period. Okay, so that's the employer on the sidelines. What about the workers? Well, for them to actually win, they've got to pass this pretty significant test known as the double majority rule. It's a two-part requirement designed to make sure the final result really reflects what the employees want. Think of it like two hurdles you have to clear, and you have to clear them in order. First, enough people have to actually show up and vote. That's called achieving a quorum. And second, of the people who did vote, the winning side has to get a clear majority.
So part one is all about participation. For the election to even be considered valid, more than half of all the eligible voters in that bargaining unit have to cast a ballot. As you can see in the formula, if you have 100 eligible voters, you need at least 51 of them to vote. If turnout is too low, the whole thing is just called a failure of election.
Okay, so let's say you cleared that first hurdle. You got enough people to vote. Now for part two, winning the actual election. To win, a union, or the no union option for that matter, has to get more than half of the votes that were actually cast. So if 80 people voted, the winner needs at least 41 of those votes to seal the deal. So the ballots are in, the quorum was met. Now what? How do we figure out who actually won? I mean, it's pretty simple if one side gets a clear majority, but what happens when the vote is split? So what about a situation like this? Imagine you've got 3 choices on the ballot: Union A, Union B, and of course, no union. And look at those results. Nobody got that magic 50% plus 1. So who wins? Is it just the one with the most votes?
Well, this is where things get really interesting. The law has a solution, and it's called a runoff election. It's basically a tiebreaker.
But here's the genius part. It's a second head-to-head election between only the top two union contenders. The no-union option, it gets dropped. This forces a final choice and guarantees that one union will emerge with a clear majority.
And it's worth pointing out that this whole formal, government-run election thing, it's the most common way to form a union, but it's not the only way. For example, an employer can just voluntarily recognize a union if they see it has majority support, or both sides can just agree to hold their own consent election.
Okay, so we've talked about the rules in a perfect world, but let's be real. In the real world, things get messy. These elections are often full of legal challenges and fights over the details. Let's look at some of the most common ones. And probably the #1 fight you see is over this simple question: who even gets to be in the union? Who is actually eligible to vote in the first place? It's a huge point of contention. The courts have this mutuality of interest test that we talked about earlier, and it's not really about your job title. The real question is, does your job involve helping management make confidential labor relations policy? So, for example, a payroll master who sees everyone's salary, they're usually in. But an HR assistant who helps with grievance procedures, they're usually out. Oh, and it's also been settled that even probationary employees get a vote.
Over the years, people have tried all sorts of things to stop or delay these elections. But the courts? They've pretty much seen it all, and they've consistently ruled against stuff that looks like interference. So, things like a last-minute challenge to the union's legal status, or a few employees suddenly saying they changed their minds, none of that is usually enough to stop the election from going forward.
When you look at the whole thing, all these rules, all these procedures, they're all designed to protect one simple fundamental right: the employee's right to choose for themselves. It's all about fairness. But of course, that leaves us with a really big final question, right? The rules are there, but what happens when they get broken? And what does that really mean for justice in the workplace?